We're doing tonight Parasha Shelach Lecha, which can be found in your Chumash uh, at the beginning of Perek Yud Gimel in the book of Bamidbar. If you're with me in the Art Scroll Chumash, it's on page 798. Of course, as you know, the Parsha is dominated by the catastrophic um, uh, plan, which I suppose seemed like a good idea at the time, although it ended in catastrophe, dispatching scouts or spies into the land of Israel. So the Parsha is known by the word Shlach or Shlach Lecha, which means to send. But the instruction, apparently Hashem told Moshe, although Rashi right away kind of backpedals on it. He says, well, actually Hashem just said, if you want to do it, you can. I'm not telling you that you should. But in any case, we know it ended in disaster. In fact, not only that, not only is it a disaster, but it is a repercussive disaster. It has reverberations throughout history. And I'm sure you know the famous Mishnah in Tanis, which says that the events of Tisha B'Av, the tragic events of Tisha B'Av were 5 altogether. Actually, there have been further tragedies since, I'm sorry to say, but up to Mishnaic times there were 5, of which the first one chronologically is the return of the spies. According to the careful calculation that the Gemara offers, the spies returned from their 40-day mission with their deleterious report, with their discouraging report on the 8th of Av, and they delivered their report. Yehoshua and Kalev sought to dispute them unsuccessfully, and as the Torah describes, Vayivku ha'am b'layla hahu, on that night the people cried. So the Talmud says, Atem bechisem bechia shel chinam. You cried for no reason. You cried a heedless or needless cry. When the time comes for tears, it will occur on the 9th of Av. It doesn't mean Hashem is being vindictive, like I'll give you something to cry about, but rather when the Jewish people are deserving of punishment, tragic events, those events, not all of them, but some of them will happen on the 9th of Av, including the most classic, in a way, the most tragic event of all, which is the Churban HaBayis, the destruction of the first temple, and the Bayis Sheni as well, on the same night, on the same day, hundreds of years later. And of course, that set the stage for the Churban and the pattern of exile and redemption from which we have not yet recovered. So this event in rabbinic tradition is not only a catastrophe for the people of that generation, all of whom perished in the wilderness in the subsequent 38 years of wandering, as you know, but it set the stage for future tragedies as well on the night of the 9th of Av. Okay, so far is only by way of general background, quite well known. The haTurim has a comment which I like because I'm sure you know, those who've been attending this year or Ramada Shurim over the weeks or months or years, you know that I have a fondness for history, if you like, even a weakness for history, Jewish history especially, because I find that it casts light and gives depth and humanizes the events that we analyze, not only so much in the Chumash, but subsequent events as well. So I was fascinated to see that the Baal HaTurim observes that the word Shlach, Shin Lamed Ches, has a gematria, very easy gematria to calculate. Shin is 300, Lamed is 30, Ches is 8, 338. So says the Baal HaTurim that the symbolism of that number is that remez leminyan shalach shanim shishtalchu v'yetzu b'golus. It alludes to the fact that in that number of years, in 338 years, they were sent. Shlach lecha means Hashem tells Moshe, you should send for yourself, send. But shishtalchu is in the reflexive, meaning the Jewish people will be sent into exile on 338 years. What does it mean? So he's referring, of course, to the fact that according to the rabbinic tradition, the reckoning of the sequence of the years, the exile, Churban Bayis Rishon, it's a good date to have awareness of. I mean, it's a tragic date, but it's good for your general Jewish knowledge. Churban Bayis Rishon took place in the year 3338, 3338. And there you have the 338. So he says, Shelach Lecha sets the stage for the Churban later on. Now, the meaning, of course, is that if Moshe had not sent the spies, or even if he had sent them, but they had not sabotaged the divine plan, and if instead of wandering in the wilderness for a total of 40 years and Moshe perishing on the east bank of the Jordan, and it would be left only to Yehoshua to lead them into the land. Were it not for that, but rather were Moshe able to fulfill his life's mission, to complete his life's mission, to bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel, into the promised land, then the whole pattern of exile and redemption repeatedly would never have been put into motion. What the Kabbalists call the Olam HaTikun, the world of perfection, the world that has been corrected and repaired, would have dawned immediately. There would have been no need for the yearning for a messianic era because it would have dawned immediately. Moshe would have been the one to build the Beis HaMikdash, and Jewish destiny would have reached its intended denouement in a time interval which, in the sweep of thousands of years of Jewish history, would have seemed like a heartbeat. That's how close the Jewish people were to realizing their destiny in that way. This Shelach Lecha, the mission of sending the spies, sadly brought about their downfall. Now, just to remind you how to remember the year 3338, perhaps you've remembered it already, but just a little bit of brief biblical Jewish history. Avraham Avinu was born in the year 1948. That's a year that is eventful for other reasons in the Gregorian calendar, of course, as we know, regarding the state of Israel. But in the Jewish calendar, that is to say, what's called Anno Mundi, counting from creation, Avraham Avinu was born in the year 1948. As I said, it's easier to remember. When he was 100 years old, so he was promised that he would have a child, and his descendants would be enslaved in a foreign land, will be strangers in a strange land. So when Abraham was 100 years old, he was told about the fact that his descendants would be like aliens in a foreign land for 400 years. So therefore, it's 500 years from 1948, which is the birth of Abraham, 100 years of the life of Abraham, 400 years of the prophecy. So therefore, in the year 2448 was the Exodus, 2448. Now, as we know, there were 40 years wandering in the wilderness. I'm not going to go through each of the milestones, but the Beis HaMikdash was built 480 years after the departure from Mitzrayim. It took them 480 years to fulfill the mitzvah mentioned in the Torah about building the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, they got around to it quite belatedly. Eventually they did it. 480 years. And the Bayis Rishon, the first temple, stood for 410 years. So just to review the math, 1948 plus 500 years is 2448. That was the year of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, of the Exodus, was 2448. 480 years until they built the Beis HaMikdash, 410 years that the first temple stood, and therefore they were exiled in the year 3338. Now, you possibly are wondering, what is that in the calendar that we're more accustomed to using in the Western world? And it corresponds to the year 422 before the Common Era. So if you want to be aware of when the Churban Beis HaMikdash took place, according to our rabbinic tradition, it was in the civil calendar, the Gregorian calendar, it was 422 years before the Common Era. Now, I don't want to go into the question of whether this correlates closely with the archaeological record, etc. We'll save that for another time. But the point is that the roots, the nucleus, the origin of the cycle of the breakdown of Jewish life, which, by the way, preceded the Churban Habayis. If you read the book of Shmuel, or even the book of Shoftim, and even more so the book of Kings, especially Sefer Malachim, you see there's a lot of turmoil and a lot of vicissitudes and a lot of unhappy events. It wasn't all sweetness and light during the era of the Beis Hamikdash either, but nevertheless, the Churban would never have happened, and for that matter, probably all of the grappling with idolatry, etc., would never have happened if it were not for Shelach Lecha Anashim 338. Okay, we've done a little bit of history, but it's all courtesy of the Baal HaTurim, who says it in a few words, but I've elaborated a little bit further. Now, what is the sequence of events? The spies were dispatched for 40 days. They came back from their wanderings, from their mission, and they said, well, it's a good land, it's got a lot going for it, but the people there are too powerful, they're too fierce, we'll never be able to overcome them, it's hopeless. And Yehoshua and Kalev tried to persuade the people otherwise, tried to dispute the rest of the spies, who of course were in the majority, and it was to no avail. And the people, it says, Vatisa, well, I'm looking at chapter 14, verse 1, which can be found in your stone Chumash on page 802. Vatisa kol hadavi itnu es kolam vayivku ha'am balayla hahu. The people lifted their voices and they cried on that night. Vayilon, and they complained to Moshe and Aaron. They said, why did you take us to die here in the wilderness? We wish you died in Egypt. Unfortunately, a plaint that we have heard before. And Pasuk Gimel, Lama Hashem evi osana la'aretz hazos linpol b'chereb nashenu v'tapenu yulavaz. It's hopeless. We're doomed. We're all going to die by the sword. Our women, our wives, our children, they're going to be plundered, and worse. Tov lanu shuv Mitzrayim. It would have been much better to go back to Egypt. Let's go. And each man, or one man, said to his brother, let's designate a different head. Moshe is a bust. Let's get somebody else. Take us back to Mitzrayim. Moshe's plan to take us into the promised land has been a major disappointment. Let's go back the other way. He won't take us back to Egypt. We'll get somebody else who will. Very strong language, very despondent, rebellious as well. Baal HaTurim says that turn of phrase, nitna rosh, let's designate a head, a different leader. So Baal HaTurim, in his brevity, says rosh remes lavodah zarah. The word, I'll just read you, zehu avodah zarah, doesn't say rosh. Nitna rosh, says Baal HaTurim, zehu avodah zarah. That refers to avodah zarah. Nitna rosh, let's choose a leader. Let's choose a head. That's avodah zarah. How is that avodah zarah? So it says there's a medrash called Osios de Rabbi Akiva. See, I'm just going to make a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה b'o. It's not a hot drink, it's a cold drink in a thermos. The Osios de Rabbi Akiva is a medrash attributed to the great Rabbi Akiva that interprets the different letters of the Aleph base, and it includes the I'll say imaginary. It's a metaphorical is probably the right word for it. The metaphorical dialogue between the Almighty and the letters of the Aleph base. Each one said, "Start the Torah with me." We don't start with Aleph because otherwise we get to the answer, the sort of selected letter right away, base. But we start from Taf. That's how it's arranged. So Taf says, choose me, and Shin says, choose me. So we go. Reish says, choose me. So Hashem says, no, I'm not choosing Reish. Why not? Because Reish is, so Reish is like Rosh. It's similar to Rosh. In fact, Reish is the Aramaic word for Rosh. So it says Rosh Devarcha Emes. You know, you start with truth. There's nothing truer than the Torah. The Torah is the manifestation of truth. So Rosh Devarcha Emes. So start with the letter Reish. That's the suggestion of the Medrash. So Hashem says, no, we're not going to start with the letter Reish. You know why? Because in the future, Israel will use the letter Reish for the worship of idols, because you're going to say Nisna Rosh v'Nashuva Mitzrayim. Let us choose a head. So Rosh and Resh are related. That's going to be your. Now, where is the Avodah Zarah in it? We'll see in a moment. But the Medrash there says that the word Reish also alludes to Avodah Zarah because it says in the book of Daniel, which is written in Aramaic mostly, or much of it, Daniel is written in Aramaic. It says, Hut Salma Reishe Didahav Tav. This idol, it's that Daniel beheld. This idol, its rosh, its head is of fine gold. So the word resh, the letter resh, which alludes to the word resh, which is related to the Hebrew word rosh, it's associated with idolatry. Also, you've got Ra and you've got Rasha. So the Medrash says that's for Hashem. Of course, the letter Resh is in the Aleph base. There are lots of nice words that start with the letter Resh as well. But these associations are reasons why it was not selected to begin the Torah. The point is that we see, according to that medrash, that the letter Resh and the word Rosh are associated with Avodah Zarah, but there's more to it as well, because the haTurim says that the Chet of Meraglim, the sin of the spies, and the sin of the golden calf are the twin tragedies that marred, unfortunately, we might even say that defined the time of the Jewish people in the wilderness. There were others as well. They complained about a lot of things. There were other misfortunes, but those are probably the two most devastating. Of course, the Egel HaZahav, the sin of the golden calf, is a form of idolatry. And here, when the Jewish people spurned the land of Israel, when they rejected the land of Israel, it's also similar to the Chet HaEgel. How so? So the haTurim says they were both after 40 days. The Chet HaEgel was as a result of the fact that Moshe was on the mountain for 40 days. He only came back in the morning of the 41st. It was too late. In a similar way, the spies were away for 40 days, and therefore that is a further similarity between the two tragic events. Moreover, he says that the Jewish people here said Nitna Rosh, and at the time of the Chet HaEgel, they said it. Now it may have been the Erev Rav who incited the Jewish people, but the fact is they said, Asher yelchu lefanenu, Eila Elohecha Yisrael, these are your gods, O Israel. Asher yel, I'm sorry, Eila Elohecha Yisrael, Asher yelchu lefanenu, sorry, Asher yelchu lefanenu, yeah. Why it says it? Because the puzzle says Asher Helucha Meretz Yisrael. In any case, a bit perplexed this choice of words here that the haTurim is, but in my total inadequacy, I would have said the remez is better. Asher Eila Elohecha Yisrael, Asher Helucha Meretz Yisrael. These are your gods, O Israel, who took you out of Mitzrayim. Asher Aleph Shin Resh has the same letters as Rosh, Resh Aleph Shin. So again, the haTurim says, firstly, we have the fact that they are natural pairs, two tragic events that had devastating impact. Each one took place after 40 days. And here the people said, Nitna Rosh, and in the case of the Chet HaEgel, it says, Eila Lecha Yisrael, Asher He'elucha Meretz Yisrael. Asher has the letters of Rosh. Moreover, and this is the most elegant one, he says, our pasuk here in pasuk Dalet says, Ish el Achiv, Nitna Rosh, V'nashuva Mitzrayim. That's an excerpt from this, within this pasuk. Ish el Achiv, each man said to his brother, but we're just using the words Ish el Achiv Nitna Rosh V'nashuva Mitzrayim. Let's designate a leader and we'll go back to Mitzrayim. Says haTurim, the Roshei Tevos, the first letters in each of those words, Ish el Achiv, it's Aleph, 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 Nun, Resh, Vav, Mem. Doesn't spell something, but it has a gematria. And the gematria is 299. And that is the same gematria as Avodah Zarah. So again, there's a further hint when the people said, let's choose another leader to go back to Mitzrayim. Of course, they were not going to serve the God of Israel in Mitzrayim. They were going to revert to their own idolatry, their old idolatry, or maybe embrace the Egyptian idolatry, which they probably had done already during their generations of persecution within Mitzrayim. So there's a remez, Ish el achiv nitna roshim reshuva Mitzrayim. The Roshei Tevos, the first letters of those words, have the collective gematria of 299, which is the same as gematria of Avodah Zarah. I would like to add something of my own. We regard the tragic rejection of the land of Israel with some, I think, beyond the tragedy of it, it is perplexing. Why did these great leaders of the Jewish people, who were righteous, who were worthy, who were selected for their eminence, how could it be that they torpedoed the whole program? And all the Mefarshim discuss this, and it is indeed perplexing. But the fact is, and this is clear from the reading of the text of the Torah, that the Jewish people, either out of self uh, uh, lack of self-confidence or poor self-concept or insecurity, or probably they didn't believe in themselves and they didn't have enough faith in Hashem, they spurned the land of Israel. So we have that tragedy and the tragedy of idolatry, which the Baal HaTurim associates the two. As if to say, one who rejects the land of Israel, it's as if he's worshiping idols. Nowadays, there are not that many Jews who worship idols in the classic sense. Idolatry has lost a lot of its prestige, a lot of its sheen, a lot of its popularity. Now, many will say, and rightly so, we have other forms of foreign worship nowadays as well. People worship celebrity, people worship money, people worship, in some cases, sports heroes and that sort of thing. So that impulse to worship something transitory and lacking in value has not disappeared. But nevertheless, the classic form of idolatry, paganism, which was de rigueur in the human experience for a long time, for thousands of years, is mostly out of vogue nowadays. Certainly not that many Jews who worship foreign gods. There may be some. What I want to get to, though, is that there's another form. I would say maybe heresy is not quite the right term, because it may not have the same theological component, but it's the same rejectionism. It's the same uh, uh, refutation, the same refusal to uh, join together with the Jewish people and to recognize the destiny of the Jewish people. And that is those who reject the state of Israel, or the land of Israel, those who have no feelings for the land of Israel. So worshiping idols is not so trendy in the Jewish world nowadays, but anti-Zionism, unfortunately, I'm not taking the position that the state of Israel represents the dawning of the Messianic era. There are many who do take that view. I'm not advancing that point of view. I don't necessarily share that point of view. However, the willingness on the part of some Jewish people, including some influential and prominent personalities, prominent for reasons fair and foul, but nevertheless people whose voices are amplified, the willingness or even the eagerness to condemn Israel, to reject the idea of Jewish statehood, to reject the idea of Jewish peoplehood itself. To me, this is a 20th and 21st century echo of the Chet Hameraglim, which, as we've seen in Baal HaTurim, is akin to a form of paganism and Avodah Zarah as well. So I've extended a little bit the thoughts of Baal HaTurim, updating. Baal HaTurim was probably written around the year 1303, so fast forward 700 years or more, and those are my thoughts regarding the comment of the Baal HaTurim in a contemporary context. We have a few more minutes left, so I want to share with you a last comment of Baal HaTurim. The Chet HaMeraglim has an epilogue as well. The sequence of events is Moshe sent out the spies. They came back with a disappointing negative report. Yoshua and Caleb were unsuccessful in effectively refuting them. Not at least in the court of public opinion, they lost the exchange. The people despaired. They cried, and they said, "Let's choose another leader, and we'll go back to Mitzrayim." Well, it didn't end well for any of them. Certainly not for the Meraglim themselves, who died right away. And Hashem said to Moshe, Well, I mean, Moshe pleaded on their behalf, and indeed, Moshe's prayers were at least partially answered, and the Jewish people were not destroyed, but the generation that was complicit in the Chet HaMeraglim, they did perish, as you know, in the course of the next generation of the subsequent 38 years. It was only their children who came into the land of Israel. Okay, that is the story. But there's an epilogue. Don't forget the epilogue. The epilogue is the people said, actually, we changed our minds. We don't want to die here in the wilderness after all, and we would like to conquer the land. And therefore, they endeavored to do exactly that. So take a look further on in this chapter at Pasuk Mem Daled. The Torah says there that Pasuk Mem. Look at Pasuk Mem, verse 40. I'll just tell you where it is in the stone Chumash as well for ease of access. You'll find on page 810. Look at Pasuk Mem. It says, Vayashkimu vaboker, they woke up in the morning after the punishment was uh, uh, communicated to them, the verdict was passed. They got up in the morning, they ascended the mountain, they said, we're going to ascend to the land after all. We have sinned. And Moshe said, don't do it. It's too late. Hilo sitzlach. Al ta'alu, Moshe said in Pasuk Membes, Al ta'alu, don't ascend. Ki en Hashem b'kirbechem, God is not in your midst. V'lo tinagfu, and that way you won't be, smitten by your enemies, because you've got Amalekim, Kenanim. Unfortunately, you missed the opportunity. If Hashem were to have been with you, which was the original plan, no problem. You'll march right into Canaan and you'll conquer it with the greatest of ease. But it's too late. Hashem is not in your midst. Then in Pasuk Mem Daled, Vaya'apilu la'los el Rosh Hahar, V'arom ris Hashem Moshe lo Moshe b'kara machaneh. The people were determined. They were intransigent in their desire to enter the land, to conquer the land. When they had lost their opportunity, Moshe and the ark did not move. Vayered Amaleki, the Torah describes how indeed the Amalekim and the Canaanim, Hayoshe Bahar, who dwelt in that mountain, they came down, they ascended against them. The Jewish people were climbing. The Amalekim had the advantage of being on top. Vayakum vayaksum ad hachorma. They struck them and pounded them until Chorma. It was sadly a resounding defeat. Says the Baal HaTurim, an interesting comment. That word Vaya'apilu with an ayin. Vaya'apilu means to act in an intransigent way, to not take no for an answer. They were determined to flout the divine will. They were determined to do that which Hashem said it's too late. You missed your opportunity. Moshe said Hashem is not in your midst, but they were determined. So what did they do? They sought to conquer the land, and unfortunately, the enemies made short shrift of them. Says the Baal HaTurim, V'ya'apilu is Gematria 212. Now, in order to reach that conclusion, you've got to spell the word V'ya'apilu with a second yud, which really should have a second yud anyway. I mean, it would be normal to write it V'ya'apilu with a second yud between the pei and the lamed. So happens the Torah writes it chaser, but for the gematria we use the yud as if it were written in the conventional way, which in the realm of drash is a legitimate approach. So the gematria V'ya'apilu is 212. You say, well, what's that? Fahrenheit? Celsius? 212 is the gematria of Tzlafchad. Tzlafchad, we don't know much about him really, but we know about his daughters, because in Parshas Pinchas, he had 5 daughters and no sons, and they approached Moshe and they said, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the Korach rebels. We would like a portion in our father's inheritance, because he's passed away, he's died, and he has no sons. We don't want it to be lost. He should come to us, and which the Torah had not previously provided for that. And as we know, Moshe conferred with Hashem, who told him, yeah, they're onto something, these Tzlafchad girls. Says the Baal HaTurim, V'ya'apilu correlates well with the opinion that Slavchad was one of the Ma'apilim. He was one of those. It says, "Kibechet omes," he died by his sin. So he didn't just die a natural death, meaning in the fullness of time, he succumbed to old age, but rather the daughters of Slavchad said, "Bechet omes," he died according to his sin. So he's one of the people who sin. Well, there are lots of them that are mentioned in the Torah. One possibility is he was the one who was gathering wood on Shabbos, but the other possibility mentioned in the Gemara is he was among those people who sought to conquer the land. So it's very interesting. Slavchad loved the land of Israel. He was determined to enter the land. He was not guilty, really. I mean, maybe at first he was guilty of spurning the land, but subsequently he came around to wanting the land, and he wanted so much that he was going to flout the divine command, which did not end well. It seems that the daughters of Slavchad inherited his love of the land of Israel. But whereas he was intransigent or headstrong, they were more discreet and more polite, and they asked, we could say, with derech eretz, and they approached Moshe and they sought Moshe's advice or Moshe's intercession even on their behalf. And as a result, their petition was answered. So we see that the daughters of Tzlafchad, according to this view, who in any case we know were from the descendant from Yosef, who loved the land of Israel, so they had it in their genes, so to speak. But even the chet, the sin of their father, was a sin because he wanted to conquer the land. He went about it the wrong way, but his daughters, at least evidently, must have been well brought up, perhaps, or maybe it's their own merit. I'm not going to go into that with too much detail, but we see that they emerge as heroic figures who love the land of Israel and who were indeed given a portion in the land of Israel. So thank you very much, and I hope that our learning tonight, I should have said at the beginning, will be a zchus for all of Klal Yisrael, and especially those living in the land of Israel or the state of Israel, whether the borders are the same as the land of Israel or different than the land of Israel, but Achenu Bnei Israel, who are, as we know very well, are in peril, and hopefully there will be a favorable resolution, that one that we can look back on with enormous satisfaction and relief, but more than relief, even exhilaration, for a favorable and enduring outcome. So thank you to everyone, and I wish you Shabbat Shalom.